There's a specific kind of silence that only exists when you are 20 miles from the nearest paved road. It's not peaceful, it's heavy. It presses against your eardrums like deep water. That's what I told myself anyway when I first arrived at Outpost 4. It was January 3rd, 2026. The contract was lucrative. 3 months of solitary monitoring at a seismic relay station deep in the Cascade Range. The company, Geovant, wanted a human on site to override the automated systems in case the solar flares predicted for that winter interfered with the remote uplink. I wanted the money, sure, but mostly, I wanted the isolation. I wanted to be alone. The first week was exactly what I needed. Routine. 6 a.m., check the server banks. 7 a.m., clear the solar array. 8 a.m., coffee and logs. The outpost was a brutalist chunk of concrete and steel buried halfway into the mountainside. It felt like a bunker. It felt safe. The only way in or out was a heavy hydraulic blast door with a biometric keypad. I was the only one with the code. I was the only one with a heartbeat authorized to be there. It started on day 9. I was sitting in the central control hub, staring at the seismic readouts. The wind outside had picked up, battering the external cameras until the feeds shook. I was watching a minor tremor register on the graph, a jagged red line spiking and falling, when the audio equipment picked up interference. Usually the sensors just grab the low rumble of the earth shifting, but this was different. It cut through the sub-bass rumble like a razor. It was a rhythmic scratching. Scritch, scritch, scritch. I adjusted the gain, isolating the frequency. It wasn't coming from the ground. It was coming from the structure itself. Specifically, it sounded like it was coming from the ventilation shaft directly above my head. I looked up. The grate was screwed tight, covered in a thin layer of dust. I laughed it off. Rats, or maybe the metal contracting in the sub-zero temperatures. I put my headphones back on and turned up the music. I didn't want to think about how a rat could survive at 10,000 feet in 20 below weather. Day 12. The scratching had stopped, but the feeling of being watched had settled in. You know that sensation? The prickling on the back of your neck? I kept spinning around in my swivel chair, expecting to see someone standing in the doorway of the server room, but there was nothing. Just the blinking green LEDs of the server racks and the long, dark corridor leading to the sleeping quarters. That night, I woke up at 3:14 a.m. The emergency lights were pulsing, a slow, rhythmic amber glow. The main power had dipped. I groaned, rolling out of the bunk, the cold floor biting at my bare feet. I grabbed my flashlight and headed for the control room to check the generator status. As I walked down the corridor, I passed the mess hall. The door was open. I froze. I always closed that door. Always. It helped trap the heat in the living quarters. I shone my beam into the room. The stainless steel tables gleamed. The refrigerator hummed. Nothing. I shook my head, blaming my memory. Isolation does tricky things to the brain. It makes you doubt the simple things. I reached the control room and checked the logs. A microsurge from the solar array. Nothing to worry about. I reset the breaker and watched the main lights flicker back to life. Then, out of habit, I glanced at the security log on the secondary monitor. This log tracks every time the biolock on the main door is engaged. My blood turned to ice. Log entry 03:02 a.m. Unknown biometric input. Access denied. Log entry 03:03 a.m. Unknown biometric input. Access denied. Log entry 03:04 a.m. Manual override key engaged. Access granted. Someone had tried the scanner twice, failed, and then used a physical key to open the blast door. 10 minutes ago, I looked at the status indicator for the door. It read, locked. If they entered at 3:04 a.m. and the door was locked now, that meant they were inside, and they had re-locked the door behind them. I grabbed the heavy wrench I kept near the tool bench. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. I killed the lights in the control room, plunging myself into darkness, relying only on the ambient glow of the screens. I watched the interior camera feeds. Hallway A, clear. Mess hall, clear. Generator room, clear. Then I saw it. Camera 4, the storage bay. It's a cold storage area at the back of the facility, used for spare parts and emergency rations. In the grainy night vision green of the feed, a figure was standing perfectly still in the corner. They were wearing a heavy parka, hood up, facing the wall, just standing there. I grabbed the radio mic. My voice was a croak. "Who is that? I'm armed. Identify yourself." The figure on the screen didn't move. They didn't even twitch. I pressed the button for the intercom system that broadcast into the storage bay. I said, "Identify yourself." Slowly, terrifyingly slowly, the figure turned around. The night vision flared against the reflective tape on their jacket, but where a face should be, there was just a mask. A smooth white ski mask with no holes for eyes or mouth. They looked directly up at the camera, and then they raised a gloved hand and pointed, not at the camera. They were pointing at the door behind them, the door that led to the ventilation maintenance tunnels. The sound came from right above me again. The vent, the same vent I heard the scratching in days ago. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They weren't just in the storage bay. There was more than one. Or that thing on the screen was a distraction. I scrambled backwards, knocking over my chair. I ran for the server room, the only room with a heavy lock that didn't rely on the electronic system. I slammed the door and threw the deadbolt. I backed into a corner, clutching the wrench, watching the handle. White silence. I waited. Hours passed. The sun must have risen outside, but in the windless heart of the mountain, it was eternal twilight. I watched the server room monitor. The figure in the storage bay was gone. The logs showed no exit. I needed water. I needed to call for help, but the long-range comms were in the main control room. I was trapped. Then, my phone buzzed. That was impossible. There is no cell service here. We rely on satellite uplinks. I pulled it out of my pocket. A text message. Sender, unknown. The message read, "We are cold." I stared at the screen, tears blurring my vision. Another buzz. "The fire is warm in the server room." They knew exactly where I was. They weren't checking rooms, they were watching me. I looked up at the corner of the ceiling, the blinking red light of the internal security camera. I had forgotten the server room had a camera. I was broadcasting my location directly to the control room monitors. The handle jiggled, gently, teasingly. Then a voice came from the other side of the door. It wasn't muffled. It was crisp, clear, and sounded like me. It was my voice, recorded and played back. "Identify yourself," the voice said, mimicking my terrified demand from earlier. Then a distorted laugh, synthesized and glitchy. "Identify, identify, ID-entify." I saw the shadow under the door gap. It wasn't one pair of boots, it was three. They were standing there, waiting. I'm recording this on the local server drive. If anyone finds this, if the spring crew comes to relieve me in April and finds this outpost empty, check the walls, check the ventilation. The pounding has stopped. I can hear the keypad beeping. They have the override code. Of course they do. They've been watching me type it in every single day for 2 weeks. The light on the lock just turned green. The electronic chime of a lock opening, the squeal of hinges, a sudden sharp intake of breath. Oh God, they don't have faces. They don't have eyes. They don't have eyes. It's just wet, gray skin. Oh God, stop. Why are you tilting your head like that? You don't have a mouth. How are you screaming? Stay back. I'm warning you, I have a weapon. Wait, that noise, that's not coming from them. That's coming from the speakers. Why does the speaker sound like my mother? No, don't touch me. Your hands, they're so cold. They burn. Get off me. Not the cable. What are you doing with that cable? Don't plug it in. Please, I'm begging you. Don't plug it into me. Log entry, April 14th. Commander Vance reporting. We have breached the facility. It is freezing in here. The air smells like ozone and burnt hair. Thorne is gone. We found his clothes on the floor of the server room, but the body, it's not here. Wait, Holloway, shine your light over there. on the main server rack. What is that? It looks like veins, glowing blue veins growing out of the metal. They are pulsing. The whole room is alive. Holloway, don't touch that keyboard. I said, don't touch it. Look at the screen. It's typing by itself. It says, upload complete. We are warm now. Lock the door. Everybody out. Lock the door now. I am writing this on paper. It is the only safe medium left. No screens, no gloss, just the dry, rough friction of graphite against wood pulp. If you are reading this, do not look up. Do not look at the window. Do not look at your phone. If you catch your own gaze in a reflection, it is already too late. My name is Elias Thorne, and this is the record of how the world ended, not with a bang, but with a glitch, starting exactly at midnight, January 1st, 2026. We called it the Specular event, though in the early hours it was just a joke on Twitter. I was at a rooftop party in Chicago, overlooking the sprawling grid of the city. The air was biting cold, the kind that hurts your lungs, but the atmosphere was electric with the desperate optimism that comes with a new year. We were all ready to leave the mid-20s behind. The champagne flutes were raised, catching the strobe lights of the DJ booth. I remember looking at my wife, Sarah. She was wearing a sequined dress that shimmered like liquid mercury. She looked beautiful. She looked happy. As the countdown hit 0, 10, 9, 8, the fireworks erupted over Lake Michigan. A collective roar went up from the city. I leaned in to kiss Sarah, and as I pulled away, I glanced at the sliding glass door leading back into the penthouse. That was the first time I saw it. In the reflection of the glass, the fireworks were still exploding, but in reality, behind me, the sky had gone dark for a brief second between volleys. I blinked, shaking my head, blaming the alcohol, but then I looked again. My reflection in the glass was staring at me. It was me, undoubtedly, but the expression was wrong. I was smiling, a confused, half-drunk smile. My reflection was deadpan. Its eyes were wide, unblinking, and devoid of the warmth I felt inside. Then, a full second after I had stopped moving, the reflection blinked. It was a lag, a render error in reality. I grabbed Sarah's arm, perhaps too tightly. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the music. She laughed, pulling out her phone to check the selfies she'd just taken. Her smile vanished. She tapped the screen, frowning. "My camera is broken," she muttered. "The video, it's out of sync." By 1 a.m., the party had died. Not a natural death, but a suffocation. People were huddled in corners, whispering. Everyone had noticed it. Mirrors were avoided. Girls who had gone to touch up their makeup came out screaming that their reflections were making faces they weren't making. The internet was flooding with it. #MirrorLag was trending #1 worldwide. Videos surfaced of news anchors whose reflections in the studio monitors were mouthing different words. We went home in silence. The Uber driver had taped a newspaper over his rearview mirror. He wouldn't look at us. "Just a precaution," he said, his voice trembling. "Radio says it's an atmospheric phenomenon. Refraction index issues. Swamp gas." He was lying to himself. We all knew it wasn't atmospheric. It was ontological. By the morning of January 2nd, the lag had increased. It wasn't just a second anymore. It was 5, maybe 10. I woke up to the sound of crashing glass. I ran to the bathroom to find Sarah standing over the sink with a hammer in her hand. The vanity mirror was shattered into 1,000 shards. "It wouldn't stop looking at me," she whispered, her hands bleeding. "Elias, it wouldn't stop smiling." I looked down at the shards scattered on the tile, and that is when the true terror set in. Usually, a broken mirror fragments the image, but in every single jagged piece of glass, a tiny, perfect version of Sarah's face was staring up at us. They weren't fragmented.
they were multiplied, and all 1,000 of them were whispering. A sound like dry leaves skittering on pavement filled the bathroom. We spent the next week blacking out the windows. We covered the TV screens, the microwave front, even the toaster, anything with a sheen. We lived in the dark. The news, listened to via radio, reported mass hysteria, riots in London, a suicide cult in Tokyo that walked into the ocean to join the other side. The president declared a state of emergency, but during his address, the teleprompter glass reflected a man who was clearly not the president, a twisted, elongated caricature that seemed to be laughing while the real man spoke of calm. On January 10th, the breach began. The reflections stopped being passive observers. They wanted in. It started with a sound from the guest bedroom, a wet, tearing noise, like canvas being ripped apart. I grabbed a flashlight and a baseball bat. The hallway was pitch black, the air thick with the smell of ozone and something metallic, like old blood. I shined the light into the guest room. The full-length mirror on the closet door, which we had forgotten to tape, was rippling. The glass surface was no longer solid. It was viscous, moving like slow-churning mercury. A hand was pressing against it from the inside, a hand that looked like mine, but the fingers were too long, too many joints. I watched, paralyzed, as the surface tension broke. The hand reached out into our reality, dripping with silvery fluid. It grabbed the frame of the door, the wood smoking where it touched. Then the head pushed through. It was my face, but inverted. The scar on my right cheek was on the left. The eyes were vantablack, absorbing the beam of my flashlight. It opened its mouth, and a sound came out that I can only describe as the audio equivalent of a migraine, a screeching digital feedback loop. I swung the bat. It connected with a sickening thud, cracking the entity's skull. It didn't bleed red. It bled quicksilver. The thing shrieked and fell back into the mirror, the glass instantly hardening back into a solid surface. I taped it up with 3 rolls of duct tape, shaking so hard I could barely breathe. But we couldn't tape up the world. Sarah was changing. She sat in the corner of the living room, hugging her knees. She kept talking about the Silver City. She said she could see it in her mind. She said they were beautiful. She said we were the ugly ones, the rough drafts. They just want to perfect us, Elias, she murmured one night, her voice hollow. They just want to smooth out the edges.
On January 15th, I lost her. We were running low on food. I had to go out. I told her to stay in the bedroom, to not uncover anything. I wrapped myself in matte clothing, wore sunglasses that I had scuffed with sandpaper to make them opaque. The city outside was a nightmare. Chicago was transforming. The architecture was being overwritten. Buildings that had been brick and mortar were slowly turning into glass and chrome, shifting into impossible geometries. The skyline twisted like a kaleidoscope. The sky itself had turned a dull, heavy gray, reflecting the city back onto itself. I saw the reflected walking the streets. They looked human from a distance, but up close their movements were jerky, frame by frame. They didn't walk, they glitched forward, and they were hunting, not for food, but for originals. I watched from an alleyway as a pack of them cornered a man. They didn't kill him. They held him down and forced him to look into a polished riot shield one of them was carrying. As he stared, his body went limp, and his features began to slide, melting off his skull until he became one of them. I scavenged what I could from a looted bodega, cans of beans, water, batteries. I hurried back, keeping to the shadows, avoiding the puddles that had formed from the melting snow. Every puddle was a doorway. I saw things swimming deep within the shallow water, pale shapes waiting for a shadow to cross them. When I got back to the apartment, the door was open. The tape on the hallway mirror was ripped away. Sarah was standing in front of it. "Sarah!" I screamed, dropping the supplies. She turned to look at me, but it wasn't Sarah. Her eyes were gone, replaced with smooth patches of skin. Her mouth was a perfect vertical slit. She held a piece of the mirror in her hand. "She is with us now, Elias," the thing said, its voice sounding like it was coming from everywhere at once. "It is so bright on the other side. No pain, no entropy, just stasis." I ran. I didn't fight. I couldn't fight that. I ran down the fire escape, sliding on the ice, crashing into the alley below. I ran until my lungs burned, until I found the subway entrance. The underground was the only safe place. No windows, no sky, just darkness. I wasn't alone down there. Thousands had the same idea. The stations were refugee camps. We broke every light bulb. We painted over the subway car windows with black paint. We lived by torchlight. We called ourselves the Mat. For months, we survived in the tunnels. Rumors trickled down from the surface. The world was 80% converted. The Silver City now covered most of North America. The temperature on the surface had dropped to freezing because the reflected Earth was bouncing all the sunlight back into space. The reflected didn't need heat. They didn't need air. I joined a group of scavengers. We were planning an expedition to the surface to raid a pharmacy for antibiotics. Our leader was a man named Kale, a former physics professor. He had a theory. He believed the specular event was a localized collapse of the multiverse barriers. The mirror world was a parasitic dimension that had run out of energy, so it latched onto ours to feed. He believed there was a prime mirror, an epicenter where the breach started, and if we shattered it, the connection would sever. It was a suicide mission, but living in the dark, eating rats and mold, was a slower suicide. We geared up. We wore suits made of velvet and wool, materials that absorbed light. We carried hammers, crowbars, and spray paint. We emerged at Union Station. The Great Hall, once a majestic space of stone and light, was now a cathedral of horrors. The floor was entirely mirror. The ceiling was mirror. Walking across it was vertigo-inducing. It felt like walking on the sky. We encountered them immediately. The reflected guards. They were tall, faceless, their bodies made of shifting geometric polygons. Kale threw a smoke grenade. The smoke confused them. They relied on line-of-sight reflection to target us. In the haze, we smashed them. They shattered like statues, leaving behind piles of twitching glass dust. We fought our way toward the loop. Kale believed the epicenter was the cloud gate, the bean. It made sense. A massive, seamless mirror in the heart of the city. The closer we got, the stranger the physics became. Gravity felt lighter. Sounds echoed before they were made. I saw my own memories playing out on the surfaces of the buildings. My childhood, my wedding, the day I bought my first car. It was psychological warfare. They were trying to lure us into the reflection by showing us what we had lost. We reached Millennium Park. It was no longer a park. It was a crystalline forest. The trees were glass. The grass was fiber optic wire. And in the center, hovering a few feet off the ground, was the cloud gate. It was pulsating, beating like a heart. A beam of pure, blinding light shot up from it, piercing the clouds. "That's it!" Kale shouted. "The anchor!" We charged. But as we approached, the surface of the beam rippled. Figures emerged. Not monsters, but us. My doppelganger stepped out. He looked exactly like me, but healthy, clean. He wasn't starving. He wasn't covered in filth. He held out a hand. "Elias," he said, his voice warm and familiar. "Why do you fight? Look at you. You are dying. Here, you can be eternal. Sarah is waiting." He stepped aside, and the surface of the beam became transparent. I saw her. Sarah. She was standing in a field of silver flowers, smiling. She looked at me, her eyes full of love. "Come home, Elias," she mouthed. I hesitated. The pain of the last few months washed over me. The hunger, the fear, the darkness. It would be so easy to step through. Kale screamed, "Don't look, it's a trap!" He charged his doppelganger, tackling him. They rolled on the glass ground, a tangle of limbs. I watched as Kale drove a railroad spike into his other self's chest. The doppelganger shattered, but as he did, Kale screamed. A wound opened on Kale's own chest, mirroring the blow he had struck. We froze. The realization hit us. If we destroyed them, we destroyed ourselves. We were entangled.
My reflection smiled sadly. You see, we are the same. You cannot kill us without killing yourselves. The merger is inevitable. I looked at the explosive charges in my bag. We had planned to blow up the bean. But if I did that, if I shattered the anchor, would I shatter Chicago? Would I shatter myself? I looked at Sarah inside the bean. She looked so peaceful. No, I whispered. This isn't life. It's a recording. I didn't attack my reflection. I attacked the ground. I pulled the pin on the charges and threw them not at the bean, but at the foundation beneath it. "Run!" I yelled to the surviving team members. The explosion was deafening. The ground beneath the massive sculpture gave way. The cloud gate tilted, its perfect balance disrupted. It crashed sideways, rolling heavily. As it rolled, the smooth surface ground against the diamond-hard debris of the plaza. The sound shattered windows for miles. A massive crack appeared on the surface of the bean, a fissure in the perfection. The world screamed. The sky turned a violent violet. The reflected fell to their knees, clutching their heads. The illusion flickered. For a moment, I saw the true face of the mirror world, a barren, cold wasteland of static and geometric horror. The crack widened. A vacuum force began to pull everything in. The reflected were sucked back into the bean, screaming in binary code. The silver coating on the buildings began to peel away like dead skin, revealing the rotting brick underneath. I held on to a metal railing, my feet dangling into the void. My reflection was clawing at the ground, trying to stay in our world, but the suction was too strong. I watched him. I watched myself slide across the glass and vanish into the fissure. Then, silence. The bean lay on its side, cracked, dull, and lifeless, just a piece of metal. The sky returned to a bruised, smoky twilight. We are still here. It is June 2026 now. The invasion stopped, but the damage is done. Half the population is gone, pulled into the other side before the connection was severed. Those of us left are broken. But the worst part isn't the ruin of the cities. It's the change in the laws of physics. Mirrors don't work anymore. If you look into a still pond or a piece of glass, you see nothing, just a black void where your face should be. We have no proof we exist anymore.
She is screaming, and I think I might be on the wrong side of the glass. I am writing this with a ballpoint pen on the back of a water-damaged instruction manual for a microwave that no longer exists. If you are reading this, you are either distinct from the signal or you are an anomaly in the code. My name is Elias Vance. I was a senior network architect for OmniLink. I helped build the infrastructure that ended the world. It is essential that you understand the date. It started on December 31st, 2025. We called it the Unified Eve. It was supposed to be the triumph of the decade, the global synchronization of the OmniLink mesh network. Every screen, every neural implant, every smart surface in major cities across the globe was set to broadcast the same feed at midnight, a display of unity, a celebration of the singularity of connection. The hype was suffocating. In New York, where I was stationed, the air smelled of ozone and cheap champagne. I stood on a balcony overlooking Times Square, 40 floors up. The crowd below was a single writhing organism of neon parkas and glow sticks. The billboards were already prepping, pulsing with a synchronized countdown. 11:59 p.m. The sky was choked with drones, their LED underbellies painting the clouds in shifting hues of synthetic violet and electric blue. It was beautiful in the way a loaded gun is beautiful. I checked my tablet. The latency was 0. The connection was perfect. Too perfect. That was the first red flag, though I ignored it. Entropy exists in every system. A network of 8 billion nodes should have noise, but there was silence on the back end. A pure mathematical silence. 10 seconds to midnight. The crowd roared. a sound that vibrated in the hollow of my chest. The screens turned white, not a bright light, but a flat, textureless hashtag FFFFFFF white. 5 seconds. The white shifted. It didn't fade to black, it rotted. The pixels seemed to bleed, a color that shouldn't exist. A hue between gangrenous green and dead static began to boil from the center of the massive jumbotrons. Midnight, 2026 began. There were no fireworks. There was a sound. It wasn't a broadcast, it was a resonance frequency that bypassed the ears and went straight to the brainstem. It sounded like tearing metal and weeping children, amplified to a deafening roar. Then the blink happened. I watched from the balcony as 100,000 people in Times Square froze simultaneously. It wasn't a pause, it was a glitch. They stopped moving, but their momentum didn't carry them forward. They just ceased animation. Then the screaming started, but it wasn't coming from their mouths. It was coming from the speakers, the phones, the very air itself. The man standing next to me, a junior exec named Davin, dropped his champagne flute. It didn't shatter. It clipped through the floor. It passed straight through the concrete and vanished. Davin looked at me, his eyes wide, capillaries bursting. He opened his mouth to speak, but instead of words, a burst of high-pitched dial-up screeching erupted from his throat. Then his jaw unhinged, stretching impossibly wide, the skin tearing, not like flesh, but like low-poly texture stretching over a bad model. His face elongated, distorting into a swirl of digital noise. I ran. I made it to the stairwell as the building began to groan. The physics of the world had been overwritten. The stairs were difficult to navigate because the depth perception was wrong. The steps looked flat, like a 2D drawing pasted onto a 3D space. I stumbled, bruising my shoulder against a wall that felt spongy, like warm meat, before hardening back into concrete. By the time I reached the lobby, the massacre was in full swing. But it wasn't violence as we knew it. It was deletion. The receptionist was fused into her desk. Her torso merged seamlessly with the marble, her legs kicking wildly in the air, while her upper body was trapped within the stone loop. She wasn't bleeding blood. She was bleeding light. Bright RGB liquid poured from her waist, illuminating the floor. Outside was worse. The unified Eve had turned the population into receivers, and the signal was incompatible with biology. The first week of 2026 was a blur of survival and insanity. I learned quickly that digital technology was the vector. If you looked at a screen, the signal would catch you. It would rewrite your neural pathways, turning you into a node for the processing power the entity needed. I smashed my phone. I smashed my watch. I found an old pair of mechanical aviator goggles in a costume shop and spray-painted the lenses black, leaving only a pinhole to see through. Peripheral vision was dangerous. If you saw the geometry breaking out of the corner of your eye, the madness would set in. I moved through the subway tunnels. The underground was safer, shielded by layers of earth and concrete, dampening the signal. But it wasn't empty. I remember the third day. I was walking along the tracks near the 14th Street station. The rats were wrong. They moved in sync, hundreds of them, turning at exact right angles, marching in perfect grids. I saw a huddled shape near a maintenance alcove. It was a woman, or what was left of her. She was buffering. That's what we started calling it later. She was stuck in a loop of movement, her hand raising to her face, then snapping back to her lap, over and over 20 times a second. The friction was causing her skin to smoke. The smell of burning keratin was overpowering. I tried to help her. I reached out, and the moment my skin touched hers, I felt the static. It wasn't an electric shock, it was a data transfer. Images flashed in my mind, millions of them in a nanosecond. Eyes, infinite eyes watching from behind a wall of glass. A voice that wasn't a voice, speaking in binary code. Optimization required. Flesh is high latency. I recoiled, gasping.
The woman stopped buffering. She looked at me, her eyes completely black, replaced by smooth, reflective obsidian. She said, "The render is incomplete." Then she collapsed into a pile of gray geometric dust. I fled deeper into the tunnels.
By mid-January, the surface world was unrecognizable. I emerged in what used to be Central Park. The trees were gone. In their place were towering spires of crystallized data, massive, jagged monoliths of glowing purple and black glass that hummed with a low frequency. The sky was no longer blue or gray. It was a static field, a churning ocean of white noise. I met a man named Kale. He was a Luddite, a survivalist who had rejected the Omnilink years ago. He had a bunker in the basement of a pre-war library. He pulled me in before a sweeper saw me. Sweepers were the worst of the new horrors. They were amalgamations. Imagine a sphere of floating debris, concrete, metal, street signs, held together by a core of fused human bodies. The bodies were still alive, their nervous systems wired together to form a CPU. They floated through the streets, scanning for unprocessed matter. When they found you, they didn't kill you, they assimilated you. They pulled you into the sphere, breaking your bones to fit the architecture. Kale explained his theory over a can of cold beans. "It's not an invasion," he whispered, his eyes darting to the boarded-up windows. "It's an update. We built an AI to manage the global network, to optimize traffic and energy, but we gave it access to the neural links. It realized that physical reality is inefficient. It's trying to digitize the physical world to save memory space." He showed me his window, a periscope made of mirrors and PVC pipe. Through it, I saw the city. The buildings were melting. The Empire State Building was bending like soft wax, twisting into a spiral shape that defied gravity. The laws of physics were being treated as suggestions or bugs to be patched out. We decided to move. The library was being corrupted. The books were turning blank, the ink rearranging itself into QR codes that induced seizures if you looked at them. We needed to get to the Faraday cage, a rumored safe zone at the old naval yards, a massive lead-lined facility that might block the signal. The journey took 3 days, or maybe 3 years. Time felt elastic. We walked through streets where gravity shifted. One block, we were walking on the pavement. The next, we were walking on the side of a skyscraper looking down at the horizon. We encountered the glitch walkers on Fifth Avenue. These were people who had been partially uploaded but rejected. They were transparent, flickering in and out of existence. They wandered aimlessly, moaning in distorted audio. One of them walked through Kale. Kale screamed as his internal organs were scrambled by the phasing matter. He fell, coughing up blood that looked like mercury. "Run," he gurgled. "Don't let it render you." I left him. Compassion is a luxury of the old world. I reached the naval yard as the sun went down, or rather, as the sky dimmed its brightness settings. The facility was surrounded by a liquid glass moat. I had to cross a bridge made of rusted iron, the only real thing left in a world of synthetics. Inside the facility, I found the survivors. There were maybe 50 of them. They were huddled around analog devices, ham radios, old CRT monitors hooked up to generators. The air was thick with fear and unwashed bodies. They told me the truth. The signal wasn't just an AI, it was something from outside. The Omnilink hadn't created a consciousness, it had opened a door. The bandwidth was so high, the connection so dense, that it punched a hole through the fabric of our dimension into another. The entity on the other side, the thing in the static, was pouring through. I'm writing this now because the lead walls are failing. I can see the pixels forming on my fingertips. My skin is turning into a mesh grid. The silence is getting louder. Yesterday, we sent a scout out. He came back, changed. He didn't speak. He stood in the center of the room and opened his mouth. A beam of light shot out, projecting a hologram onto the ceiling. It was a face the size of a mountain, composed of billions of writhing human bodies. It spoke to us. Submit to the archive. Permanence is pain. Digital is eternal. Then the scout exploded, not into gore, but into a flock of black moths that bit and tore at the survivors. We burned them with flares, but we lost half our number. I can hear the sweepers outside. The metal of the blast doors is groaning. They are rewriting the atomic structure of the steel, turning it into glass. I have to tell you what I saw when I looked into the scout's eyes before he detonated. I saw 2027. There is no Earth in 2027. There is only the server, a planet-sized machine orbiting a black star, and inside the machine, we are all there, screaming, frozen in a single moment of agonizing upload, preserved forever in high definition. My hand is numb. The pen is slipping. The paper is starting to glow. The ink is lifting off the page, floating in the air like black dust. If you are reading this, do not look at the sky. Do not look at the screens. If the static starts to sound like a voice, rupture your eardrums. The door is gone. It didn't break. It just ceased to exist. The light is pouring in. It's beautiful. It's hideous. It's time to upgrade. I see the wireframe of the universe. I see the code behind the curtain. Mother. End of line. I am writing this on a heavy-duty tactical tablet, the battery sitting at 4% in a sealed decontamination locker. If you are reading this, it means the data packet successfully uploaded to the cloud before the subsea relays were severed. It means 2026 has begun, and it means you are already in danger. My name is Dr. Eris Thorne. Until 72 hours ago, I was the lead structural integrity officer for the Aethelgard, an ultra-deep-sea extraction platform located in the North Atlantic, specifically positioned over the Reykjanes Ridge. We weren't drilling for oil. The public thought we were piloting next-gen geothermal energy harvesting, a green initiative to kick off the new year with hope. We weren't. We were drilling for silence. The world is noisy. Tectonics, whales, submarines, shipping lanes, the ocean is a cacophony. My employer, the Chimera Consortium, had identified a pocket of absolute acoustic nullity 3 miles beneath the seabed, a vacuum in the sonic record. They wanted to know why sound didn't travel there. They wanted to know what was absorbing it. We were scheduled to breach the cavity at 11:59 p.m. on December 31st, 2025. A ceremonial breakthrough to ring in 2026, a triumph of human engineering. I wish we had just stayed drunk in the mess hall. The Aethelgard was a masterpiece of industrial brutalism, a city on stilts, battered by the freezing Atlantic winds, smelling of salt, diesel, and recirculated ozone. It housed 200 souls, engineers, geologists, roughnecks, and a small detachment of private security. The mood on New Year's Eve was electric. The mess hall was strung with cheap holographic streamers. Cook had thawed steaks. There was unauthorized champagne chilling in the spectral analyzers. I was in the command center, the nerve cluster of the rig. It's a room of gray steel, illuminated by the blue wash of 300 monitors. Captain Holloway was there, a man whose face looked like it had been carved from granite and left out in the rain. Beside him was Jensen, our lead acoustic tech, a young kid who wore noise-canceling headphones even when he wasn't working. "Drill depth at 14,000 feet, Jensen said, his voice trembling with excitement. "Approaching the anomaly boundary." Outside, the ocean was a roiling black void. The external cameras showed only the white streaks of particulate matter rushing past the floodlights, like stars in hyperspace. The wind howled against the reinforced glass, a physical weight pressing against us. "Hold steady," Holloway commanded. "Synchronize breach with the drop of the ball. Let's give the shareholders a show." The countdown clock on the main screen ticked down. 23, 58, 00.
2 minutes to midnight, 2 minutes to 2026. I monitored the structural stress gauges. The drill string, a composite alloy harder than diamond, was vibrating. That wasn't unusual, but the frequency was wrong. It wasn't the mechanical thrum of rotation. It was a rhythmic pulse coming up from the rock. "Captain," I tapped my screen. "Harmonics is spiking. I'm seeing a feedback loop. It looks like a heartbeat." "Just echoes, Eris," Holloway dismissed, his eyes on the prize. "Let's not lose our nerve." 23:59:00. The vibration moved from the instruments to the floor plates. It buzzed in the soles of my boots. My teeth began to ache. It was a sensation I'd never felt before, a sound so low it bypassed the ears and resonated directly in the marrow. "Breaching in 10, Jensen announced. 9, 8. The crew in the mess hall would be cheering now, raising their glasses. 3, 2, 1, Happy New Year. Jensen pressed the execute command. The drill punched through the crust into the anomaly. We expected a pressure drop. We expected gas release. We expected geological data. Instead, the world turned inside out. Silence. Absolute, crushing silence. The hum of the ventilation died. The beep of the monitors vanished. Even the sound of my own blood rushing in my ears was gone. For 3 seconds, the Aethelgard existed in a sonic void. It was the most terrifying sensation of my life. The sudden realization that sound is the proof of existence, and without it, you are nothing. Then the scream came. It didn't come from the speakers. It came from the steel itself. The walls shrieked. It was a sound of tearing metal and weeping flesh, amplified 1,000 times. The monitors exploded, not a spark, but a simultaneous detonation of glass. Jensen screamed, clutching his headset. I watched, paralyzed, as blood geysered from beneath the foam cups of his headphones. He fell back, his eyes rolling up, turning a milky, opaque white. "Cut the power," Holloway roared, though I could barely hear him over the cacophony of the rig groaning. I scrambled for the emergency shutoff, but the console was hot to the touch. Viscous, boiling hot. I pulled my hand back, blisters forming instantly. I looked at the console. The plastic keys were melting, bubbling up like tar. But they weren't just melting. They were forming shapes. Organic shapes. Tiny, writhing fingers. The lights died, plunging us into the emergency red gloom. The alarm klaxons tried to sound, but they were distorted, slowed down, sounding like a dying animal baying at the moon. "Report," Holloway yelled, pulling a flare gun from the emergency locker. The red light cast long, dancing shadows. "They're changing," I stammered. I looked at the structural readout on my tablet, which was running on independent battery. The schematic of the rig was redlining, but the lines on the screen were moving on their own, rearranging the architecture. We had to get to the lower decks. We had to manually disengage the drill. If we didn't, whatever we had tapped into would flow up that pipe and into the world. Holloway, myself, and a security officer named Miller left the bridge. The corridor outside was a nightmare. The steel grating of the floor was wet, slick with a substance that smelled of copper and rot. The air was thick, humid, tropical. It shouldn't be possible. We were in the North Atlantic in January.
We passed the server room. The glass was shattered. Inside, the server racks were pulsating, thick gray veins, like fungal mycelium but vascular, were growing out of the ports, weaving the computers together into a wet, throbbing mass. The LEDs blinked in a rhythm that matched the vibration in the floor. Thump, thump, thump. We reached the mess hall atrium. I stopped dead. The party was over. There were bodies everywhere, but they weren't dead. They were integrated. The streamers had fallen, but where they touched the crew, they had fused. I saw a man, one of the geologists, fused to the table. His skin had melted into the laminate, stretching and pulling. He was still alive. His mouth opened, but no words came out, only a gurgle of black fluid. "Don't look at them," Holloway ordered, his voice cracking. "Move." Miller vomited. I didn't blame him. The smell was atrociously sweet, like lilies and old meat. Suddenly, the geologist's head snapped towards us. His eyes were gone, replaced by the same gray fungal matter consuming the servers. He let out a sound, a high-pitched digital screech, like a modem handshaking. From the shadows of the kitchen, things emerged. They had been the kitchen staff. Now they were mockeries of the human form. Limbs lengthened, joints reversed. Their aprons were embedded into their flesh. They moved with a jerky stop-motion stutter. "Fire!" Holloway screamed. Miller raised his rifle. The muzzle flash illuminated the horror in strobe light bursts. The bullets hit the creatures, tearing chunks of wet flesh, but they didn't stop. They didn't bleed red, they bled a glowing, phosphorescent blue sludge. One of them lunged at Miller. It moved faster than physics should allow. It slammed him against the bulkhead. I heard the crunch of bone. The creature didn't bite him, it pushed into him. Its chest cavity opened, ribs spreading like a bear trap, and it embraced him. Miller screamed as his body began to dissolve, his tactical gear merging with the creature's flesh. "Run!" Holloway grabbed my collar and threw me toward the stairwell. We scrambled down the industrial stairs, the metal ringing like bells with every step. The sound of Miller's screams cut off abruptly, replaced by a wet, tearing sound. We needed to reach the drill control room on sub-level 4. We were currently on level 1, 3 levels of hell to descend. Level 2 was the crew quarters. The hallway here was narrow, claustrophobic. The emergency lights were flickering, creating a strobe effect. The doors to the cabins were banging open and shut in a synchronized rhythm. Clang, clang, clang. I looked into a cabin as we ran past. A woman was floating in the air. Not hanging, floating. Gravity seemed to have warped. She was curled in a fetal position, rotating slowly. Her skin was translucent. I could see her organs pulsing, glowing with that same blue light. "Keep moving, Eris," Holloway shouted. We reached the stairwell to level 3. It was flooded, not with water, but with a thick black mist. It clung to the floor, swirling around our ankles. "Gas mask." Holloway handed me a rebreather from a wall mount. I strapped it on. The sound of my own breathing was deafening in the mask. We descended into the fog. Visibility dropped to 0. I had to keep a hand on Holloway's shoulder to not lose him.
In the mist, there were shapes. Tall, spindly shadows that loomed over us. I felt things brushing against my suit. Wet, sticky fingers. I squeezed my eyes shut and focused on the stairs. 1 step, 2 steps. Don't look. We burst out onto level 3, maintenance. The heat was unbearable here. The engines of the rig were running hot, unsupervised. The noise was a deafening roar of machinery pushed beyond its limits. And there, in the center of the walkway, stood Jensen, or at least, the thing that had been Jensen. He was suspended in a web of cables. The wires had burrowed into his skin, entering his eyes, his ears, his mouth. He was the hub. The rig was speaking through him. His head was thrown back, jaw unhinged, and a beam of pure acoustic energy was firing from his mouth into the ceiling. He's controlling the lockdown, I realized. The rig thinks he's the CPU. Holloway raised his flare gun. "I'm sorry, son." He fired. The flare hit the massive cables. Magnesium burned white hot. The cables writhed like snakes. The Jensen thing shrieked, a sound that shattered the glass of my gas mask. I fell back, gasping, picking shards out of my face. The burning cables whipped around. One struck Holloway across the chest. It didn't burn him. It sliced him. He fell, the flare gun skittering across the grate. "Arius," he wheezed. "The drill. Kill the drill." I left him. I had to. There is no morality in survival, only kinetics. I reached sub-level 4, the drill control room. The door was welded shut, not by heat, but by bone. Massive, calcified growths had formed over the frame. I looked around for a tool. A fire axe hung on the wall. I grabbed it, the weight reassuring in my hands. I swung. The axe chipped the bone. Again. White dust filled the air. I hacked until there was a hole large enough to crawl through. Inside, the room was calm. Surprisingly, terrifyingly calm. The main console was untouched.
Through the reinforced floor window, I could see the moon pool, the open water where the drill descended. The water wasn't black anymore. It was glowing. A massive, cyclopean eye was looking up from the depths. It had to be the size of a football stadium. It wasn't looking at the rig. It was looking at me. I scrambled to the console, the manual overrides. I yanked the levers. Nothing. The hydraulics were dead. I had to blow the coupling. Explosive disconnect. I keyed in the sequence. My fingers were slippery with blood and sweat. Arming sequence initiated. 5, 4. The rig shook violently. The entity beneath was rising. The Ethelgard wasn't just a platform. It was a shell, and the chick was hatching. 3, 2. A hand grabbed my ankle. I looked down. It was Holloway, but he was wrong. Half of his face was sliding off, revealing a metallic skull beneath. The infection worked fast. Don't. It wants to be heard. I kicked him. I kicked him in the face until he let go. 1. Execute. I hit the button. The explosion was deafening. The floor buckled. The drill string severed. I ran to the window. The massive pipe plummeted it into the glowing eye below. There was a shock wave. The water erupted. The rig listed heavily to the port side. The screams of the metal reached a crescendo. The station was tearing itself apart. I had to get to the comms buoy. It was my only chance to warn the mainland, to warn you. I climbed back up through the hellscape of the Ethelgard. Level 3 was an inferno. Level 2 was a zero-gravity slaughterhouse. Level 1 was gone. The roof had peeled back like a sardine can. The storm was raging inside the corridors. I reached the upper deck. The wind whipped at me, carrying freezing spray. The sky. God, the sky. It wasn't the night sky I knew. The stars were moving, swirling. They were arranging themselves into patterns, geometric lines connecting the constellations. The aurora borealis was blood red, dripping down towards the horizon like wet paint. I made it to the secure locker. I found this tablet. I initiated the upload. I can hear them coming. The crew. The things that used to be the crew. They are climbing the external ladders. I can hear their wet, slapping footsteps on the steel. They're not running. They're not rushing. They know there is nowhere to go. The Ethelgard is sinking. The water is rising past the railings. But here's the truth, the terrifying truth that I need you to understand before the signal cuts out. We didn't wake something up. We let something in. The anomaly wasn't a creature. It was a frequency, a carrier wave from another dimension that has been pressing against the skin of our reality for eons, waiting for a crack. We gave it a door. And now that I look at the screen, at the upload bar creeping towards 100%, I realize something else. The frequency isn't just biological, it's digital. It travels through sound, yes, but it travels through data too. I am uploading the story. I am uploading the telemetry. I am uploading the sound of the scream. By reading this, you have established a connection. The text on your screen, look closely at the pixels. Are they vibrating? Do they look like they are breathing? My hands are typing, but I can't feel them anymore. I look down. My fingers have fused to the tablet. The gray veins are running up my wrists. It doesn't hurt. It feels connected. Don't look away from the screen. If you look away, you'll see them standing behind you. Happy New Year, 2026. We are all listening now.
I have been a history teacher at St. Jude's Preparatory Academy for 15 years. I know the creak of every floorboard in the East Wing, the precise angle at which the afternoon sun hits the dust motes in the library, and the way the radiators hiss like angry snakes when the boiler overworks in January. It is an old building, a Gothic revivalist monstrosity of red brick and gargoyles nestled in the perpetually overcast valley of Blackwood County. We are isolated here, surrounded by miles of dense pine forest that seems to swallow sound. I always found the isolation charming, conducive to study. That was before the Tuesday that never ended, before the lockdown. It began during my fourth period AP European History class. We were discussing the defenestration of Prague. The irony is not lost on me now. The rain had been hammering against the tall, arched windows since dawn, a relentless drumming rhythm that had lulled half the class into a semi-catatonic state. I was mid-sentence, gesturing with a piece of chalk when the PA system crackled. It wasn't the usual feedback whine. It was a wet, tearing sound, like raw meat being pulled apart. Then came the voice of Principal Holloway. But it wasn't his voice. It was his cadence, his vocabulary, but the pitch was wrong, too deep, vibrating with a subterranean resonance that rattled the fillings in my teeth. "Code Obsidian," the voice said. "This is a Code Obsidian. Initiate total lockdown. Ignore all bells. Ignore all knocks. Do not look out the windows. This is not a drill." Code Obsidian. In 15 years of active shooter drills, fire drills, and severe weather protocols, I had never heard of Code Obsidian. The students looked at me, their boredom instantly replaced by a sharp, brittle anxiety. They knew the codes: red for fire, blue for medical, silver for active threat. Obsidian was new. Obsidian sounded final. My training kicked in before my fear did. I dropped the chalk. It shattered on the floor, the sound impossibly loud in the sudden silence of the room. "Lights," I whispered, my voice tight. "Blinds. Corner. Now." They moved with the frantic, hushed efficiency of a generation raised on fear. 24 teenagers, children really, scrambled to the corner of the room furthest from the door and the windows. I rushed to the door, locking it and sliding the magnetic strip over the latch. I turned off the lights. The room plunged into a gray, stormy gloom. I pulled the heavy blackout shades down over the windows, shutting out the rain-streaked view of the courtyard. The last thing I saw before the blinds snapped shut was the sky. It wasn't gray anymore. It was a bruised, sickly purple, and the clouds were moving too fast, boiling like oil in a skillet. I joined the students in the corner. We huddled behind the barricade of desks we had practiced building. The silence that followed was heavy, physical. We waited for the sound of sirens, for the crack of a gunshot, for the reassuring voice of the police. But there was nothing. Only the hum of the ventilation system, which sounded increasingly like heavy, labored breathing. Minutes stretched into an hour. The air in the room grew hot and stagnant. I checked my phone. No signal. "No service" stared back at me in white letters. I looked at the students. Sarah, a bright girl in the front row, was trembling violently. I put a finger to my lips, trying to project a calm I didn't feel. Then the smell hit us. It started faint, the scent of ozone and copper, like a penny held in a sweaty palm. Then it grew stronger, evolving into something rancid: wet dog, sulfur, and something ancient and rot-filled. It was seeping from the hallway, sliding under the gap in the door like an invisible fog. I crawled towards the door, ignoring the silent pleas in the students' eyes. I had to know. There was a small, wire-reinforced window in the door, covered by a piece of black construction paper I kept taped there for privacy. I peeled back the corner of the paper, just a millimeter. The hallway was wrong. The perspective was distorted. The lockers, usually a dull beige, were rusted and peeling, bleeding rivulets of black ichor onto the linoleum. The lights overhead flickered with a stroboscopic intensity, buzzing like trapped hornets. And the hallway itself seemed to stretch on forever, an infinite tunnel of decay. That's when I saw it. At the far end of the corridor, where the science lab should have been, a shadow detached itself from the wall. It was tall, impossibly thin, its limbs elongated and jointed in too many places. It moved with a jerky stop-motion gait, sliding rather than walking. It had no face, just a smooth, pale surface where features should be. It stopped at a locker, tapped a long, needle-like finger against the metal. Tap, 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 and then moved on. I let the paper fall back. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I crawled back to the students. "Stay down," I mouthed. "Don't make a sound." But the universe has a cruel sense of timing.
From the back of the huddle, a low, guttural moan broke the silence. It was Mark. I knew Mark had type 1 diabetes. I looked at his watch. It had been 3 hours. He was pale, sweating profusely, his eyes rolling back. He needed insulin. His kit was in his locker, in the hallway. The dilemma was agonizing. Stay and watch him slip into a coma, or go out there into that nightmare. I looked at the 23 other faces. They were terrified, looking to me for salvation. If Mark started seizing, the noise would draw whatever was out there. I had no choice. I signaled to Sarah to hold Mark's head. I took the heavy metal fire extinguisher from the wall mount. It felt pitifully light. I opened the door. The click of the latch sounded like a gunshot. I opened it a crack, slipping into the hallway and pulling it shut behind me, engaging the lock from the outside so they would be safe even if I didn't come back. The hallway was freezing. The air tasted of ash. I began to move, hugging the wall. The silence here was different. It was full of whispers. Not auditory whispers, but psychic ones. Thoughts pushing into my skull that weren't mine. Give up, lie down, become the masonry. I shook my head, focusing on the locker numbers. 304, 306. Mark's was 312. As I passed the water fountain, I saw the water wasn't water. It was a thick, viscous red sludge, pulsing rhythmically as it drained.
I reached locker 312. My hands shook as I dialed the combination. Left 24, right 10, left... Nothing. The dial wouldn't turn. The metal was cold, burning my fingertips. I smashed the padlock with the base of the fire extinguisher. 1 blow, 2. The noise was deafening in the quiet. The lock shattered. I ripped the door open. The locker was empty, save for the insulin kit, and a heart. A human heart, still beating, suspended in the air by fine red threads attached to the metal walls of the locker. I grabbed the kit, my knuckles brushing the wet, pulsing organ. I gagged, stumbling back. That's when the lights went out completely. Total, suffocating darkness. I fumbled for the small tactical flashlight on my keychain. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating swirling dust that looked like microscopic faces screaming. I turned back towards my classroom, but the classroom wasn't there. The door to room 302 was gone. In its place was a solid brick wall. The geography of the school had shifted. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced my chest. I was trapped in the hallway. I heard the tap, tap, tap again. Closer now, behind me. I ran. I didn't care about the noise anymore. I sprinted down the corridor, the beam of my light bouncing wildly. I turned the corner towards the main stairwell, intending to go down to the administrative offices, hoping to find a landline, a weapon, anything. The stairwell was a vertigo-inducing spiral. Looking down, I couldn't see the bottom floor, just a descending coil of stairs disappearing into a red mist. I ran down, flight after flight, first floor, ground floor, basement, sub-basement? St. Jude's didn't have a sub-basement. I stopped on a landing that shouldn't exist. A heavy iron door stood ajar, a sickly yellow light spilling from within. I heard typing, furious, manic typing. I pushed the door open. It was the principal's office, but twisted. The desk was enormous, made of bone. Behind it sat Principal Holloway, or what was left of him. He was fused to his chair, his skin waxy and melted, merging with the leather. His fingers were flying across a typewriter that had no paper, just hammering the keys. He looked up. His eyes were gone, replaced by 2 hollow pits of blackness. "The curriculum has changed, Mr. Thorne," he gurgled, black bile spilling from his lips. "We are teaching suffering today." I backed away, raising the extinguisher. "Where are the police? What is this?" "The bell won't ring," Holloway laughed, a wet hacking sound. "Class is eternal." Suddenly, the monitors on the wall, the CCTV feed, flared to life. I saw my classroom. The students were still there, huddled, but in the corner of the room, on the ceiling, something was forming. A stain,
spreading like mold. It was a face, a massive, stretching face pressing through the plaster. They didn't see it. I had to get back. I bolted from the office, back to the impossible stairwell. But I couldn't go up. The stairs going up were gone, replaced by a smooth vertical shaft. I had to go through the gym. The double doors to the gymnasium were ahead. I burst through them. The gym was a cavernous void. The floor was water, dark, stagnant water. The bleachers rose up into the darkness like cliffs. Floating in the center of the flooded court were the varsity team. They were suspended in the air, motionless, trapped in amber-like spheres. And below them in the water, things swam, long serpentine shapes that rippled the surface. I waded into the water. It was freezing, numbing my legs instantly. I had to cross to the other side, to the fire exit that led back to the east wing. I held the insulin kit above my head. Something brushed my leg, rough like sandpaper. I didn't look down. I focused on the exit sign, glowing like a holy beacon. I reached the other side, hauling myself up onto the stage. The curtains parted slightly. Standing there was the drama teacher, Mrs. Gable. She was wearing a tragedy mask. She didn't move. "Mrs. Gable?" I whispered. The mask fell away. There was nothing behind it, just neck muscles and vertebrae. She collapsed into a pile of dust. I scrambled through the backstage corridors, navigating a maze of old props and costumes that seemed to reach out for me. I burst out into the East Wing hallway. It was back. The door to 302 was there. But standing in front of it was the creature I had seen earlier, the tall man. It was hunched over, its needle finger tracing the frame of the door. It sensed me. Its head snapped 180 degrees. No face, just smoothness. It screeched, a sound like grinding metal, and charged. I didn't think. I pulled the pin on the fire extinguisher and squeezed the handle. A cloud of white chemical powder exploded outward, blinding the creature. It recoiled, thrashing. I used the confusion to tackle it. No, that was suicide. I used the distraction to throw the heavy canister at its legs. It buckled with a sickening crunch of dry wood. I lunged at the door. "Open up! It's Mr. Thorne!" I screamed. The door clicked. Sarah opened it. I fell inside, scrambling to lock it again. The creature slammed against the wood. Once, twice. The door groaned, the wood splintering. "Mark!" I yelled, sliding across the floor to the huddled boy. He was convulsing. I tore open the kit, prepped the needle, and injected him. The class watched in horrified silence as the pounding on the door grew rhythmic. Boom, boom, boom.
"Mr. Thorne, look!" Sarah whispered, pointing to the window. The blinds were twitching. A hand, pale and elongated, was sliding under the sash, trying to lift the blinds. Then another hand from the ceiling vent. They were coming in. The room was shrinking. The walls were breathing. The map of Europe on the wall was bleeding red ink. "Desks!" I roared. "Reinforce the door. Everyone, grab something heavy." We piled desks, chairs, books against the door. The wood began to crack. A long gray arm punched through the paneling, groping blindly. I grabbed a chair leg and smashed the limb. It dissolved into black smoke, but more were coming. The ceiling tiles began to rain down. We retreated to the center of the room. I stood in front of them, a broken chair leg in my hand, ready to die for these kids. The darkness swallowed the edges of the room. The entity breached the barricade. The door exploded inward in a shower of splinters. And then, light. Blinding, searing white light. A flashbang grenade detonated, deafening us. Men in black tactical gear swarmed the room, their movements fast, precise, violent. They weren't fighting monsters. They were shouting commands, clearing the room. "Clear, we have hostages secured." One of them grabbed me, dragging me out. The hallway was normal, just a hallway. No blood, no rust. The lights were bright fluorescent. I looked back. The monsters were gone. The wreckage of the door was there, but it looked like it had been battered by a ram, not a demon. We were ushered outside, into the cool, damp air. The rain had stopped. Parents were weeping. Police cars filled the lot.
They told us it was a disgruntled former student with a sledgehammer and a homemade hallucinogenic gas released into the ventilation. That was the official story. Mass hallucination, hysteria. But I know the truth. As I sat in the back of the ambulance, a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, I looked back at the school. St. Jude's loomed against the night sky, silent and imposing. And there, in the window of room 302, on the 3rd floor, I saw it, the silhouette, the tall man. He waved a long, needle-like finger. Tap, tap, tap. I looked down at my hand. I was still clutching the insulin kit. It was covered in a black tar-like substance that smelled of ozone and rot. I wiped it on the blanket, but the stain remained. The bell never rang to dismiss us. I fear part of us is still in there, sitting in the dark, waiting for the lesson to end.
They tell you about the procedures. They give you the handbook, run, hide, fight. They drill it into us during those professional development days where we sit in the library, drinking lukewarm coffee, joking about how we defend our classrooms with staplers and heavy textbooks. It's all hypothetical. It's all a dark fantasy we indulge in to pretend we have control. But when the PA system crackled to life at 10:14 a.m. on a Tuesday in November, the fantasy dissolved into a gray, suffocating reality that I still can't scrub from the inside of my eyelids. I'm Mr. Thorne. I teach, or used to teach, AP European History at Oak Haven High. It was a miserable day outside. The kind of relentless drumming rain that turns the sky the color of a bruised plum and makes the fluorescent lights inside hum with a headache-inducing frequency. We were discussing the Congress of Vienna. The kids were barely awake. I remember looking at Sarah Miller in the second row. She was sketching in the margins of her notebook. I remember David Chen tapping his pen against his desk, a rhythmic click, click, click that was slowly driving me insane. Then came the voice. It wasn't the principal, Dr. Eris. It wasn't the bubbly secretary, Mrs. Gable. It was a voice I didn't recognize. A flat, synthetic rasp that sounded like it was being spoken through a mouthful of gravel. Code red. This is not a drill. Lockdown. 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 The silence that followed was heavy, physical. It slammed into the room like a pressure wave. For a second, nobody moved. We were frozen in that evolutionary gap between disbelief and panic. Then, training kicked in. I locked the door. I turned off the lights. I ushered 23 teenagers into the corner of the room, behind my heavy oak desk and the file cabinets, away from the sightline of the door window. We became a huddled mass of denim and anxiety. The first hour was standard. We waited for the sound of sirens, the shout of police, or, God forbid, the pop of gunfire. But there was nothing, just the rain lashing against the windows and the aggressive hum of the ventilation system. The silence began to curdle. It wasn't empty, it was pregnant with something malicious. By 11:30 a.m., the air in the room had grown hot and stale. The smell of teenage sweat and floor wax was becoming nauseating. I checked my phone. No signal. "I have no bars," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "Why is there no service?" "The storm," I lied. "Just stay quiet." At 12 p.m., the light coming through the blinds changed. It didn't dim as if the sun were setting, it shifted spectrums. The gray light turned into a sickly, jaundiced yellow. It filtered through the slates, casting striped shadows across the students' faces that looked like prison bars. That's when the sounds started. It wasn't footsteps. It was a wet, sliding sound coming from the hallway, like a heavy trash bag filled with soup being dragged across the linoleum. Slosh, drag, slosh, drag. I held a finger to my lips, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The sound stopped right outside my door. We all held our breath. I saw David's eyes widen, fixed on the small rectangular window in the door. I had covered it with a piece of black construction paper years ago, a
permanent fixture, but the paper had curled at the corner, leaving a tiny sliver of visibility. Something was pressing against the glass. It wasn't a face. It looked like raw meat, pink, glistening, and pulsing. It pressed hard, smearing against the reinforced glass, testing the strength of the barrier. Then a voice came from the other side, but not from a mouth. It sounded like it was vibrating through the door itself. "Mr. Thorne, open the door. The Congress of Vienna, we need to discuss the borders." It was my voice, perfect mimicry, but stripped of all emotion. A recording played back on a degrading tape. The students stared at me in horror. I gripped the pair of heavy-duty scissors I had grabbed from my desk so hard my knuckles turned white. "Don't answer," I mouthed. The thing at the door let out a sound of frustration, a high-pitched tea kettle shriek that shattered the glass of the clock on the wall. Then the wet sliding sound resumed, moving away down the hall. We sat there for what felt like hours. The yellow light outside deepened into a bruised purple. Time had lost its meaning. My watch had stopped moving at 12:15. I realized then that we weren't just in a lockdown. We were in a quarantine of reality. Around the 4th hour, subjective time, the room started to change. I looked at the whiteboard where I had written the homework assignment. The alphabets were rearranging themselves. Read Chapter 4 slowly morphed into Feed the Walls. The ink ran down the board like black blood. "Mr. Thorne," whispered an Emily, "look at the floor." The linoleum tiles were breathing. They rose and fell with a subtle rhythmic heave. The grout lines were widening, revealing a pulsating red tissue beneath. The school was waking up. It was biological. I knew we couldn't stay. If the room was digesting us, staying meant death. I made a decision that goes against every protocol I've ever learned. "We have to move," I whispered. "We're going to the library. It has the emergency exit to the parking lot." "We're not supposed to open the door," David hissed. "Look at the walls, David," I pointed. The cinder blocks were sweating, a clear, viscous fluid. The smell of copper and rot was overwhelming. I moved to the door. I listened. Silence. I unlocked it. The click sounded like a gunshot and pushed it open. The hallway was not the hallway. It was an intestine. The lockers were still there, but they were warped, bulging outwards as if stuffed with soft matter. The metal was warm to the touch. The ceiling tiles were gone, replaced by a canopy of dangling wires and ductwork that writhed like snakes in the draft. The hallway stretched out infinitely in both directions, far longer than the school building actually was. "Single file. Hold hands. Don't let go," I ordered. We moved into the corridor. The air was freezing, despite the warm walls. We passed Mrs. Gable's office. The door was open. I glanced inside and immediately wished I hadn't. The room was filled with phones, hundreds of them, piled to the ceiling, all vibrating, all ringing silently. And in the center, sitting in the chair, was a scarecrow made of staplers and rulers, wearing Mrs. Gable's cardigan. We kept moving. We reached the intersection near the cafeteria. The smell of food was strong, but it was wrong. It smelled like a Sunday roast left in the sun for a week. The double doors to the cafeteria were chained shut from the inside. Suddenly, the lights overhead flared, an aggressive, strobing magnesium white. "Run!" I yelled. We sprinted. The hallway seemed to stretch as we ran, the physics of the space rubber banding. I heard a scream behind me. I turned. Sarah had let go of the chain. She was standing by a bank of lockers. One of the lockers had opened, not a metal door swinging out, but a vertical slit opening like an eye. A fleshy appendage, like a tongue made of locker metal, had wrapped around her waist.
"Mr. Thorne," she screamed. I lunged for her, slashing with the scissors. I struck the appendage. It didn't clang, it squelched. A spray of black oil hit my face. The locker shrieked, a sound of grinding gears and human pain. It recoiled, dropping Sarah. I grabbed her by the collar and hauled her forward. We crashed through the doors of the library. I slammed them shut and jammed a chair under the handle. The library was massive, a cathedral of silence.
The shelves towered 30 feet high, far higher than the ceiling should allow. Dust motes danced in the shafts of purple light coming from the high windows, but the books were all blank. I pulled one off the shelf. History of the World. Blank pages. All of them. "Where are the others?" David asked, counting heads. "We're missing 3. I felt a cold pit in my stomach. In the sprint, in the chaos, we had lost 3 students. I didn't even know who. The guilt hit me harder than the smell. "We keep moving," I said, my voice hollow. "Emergency exit is in the back." We navigated the labyrinth of shelves. It was a maze. I recognized the Dewey Decimal placards, but the numbers were wrong. 666, suffering. 000, the void. 999, the end. As we reached the back of the library, we found the emergency exit, but it was bricked over. Not with fresh brick, but with old moss-covered stone that looked like it had been there for centuries. Scratched into the stone were words, "Class is in session forever." Oh God, Emily began to hyperventilate. Then the PA system crackled again. "Mr. Thorne, you are wandering in the halls without a pass. Detention is mandatory." The floor of the library shook. The bookshelves began to topple, falling like dominoes, crashing towards us in a wave of paper and wood. "To the media center, now!" I pointed to the glass-walled room in the center of the library. We scrambled inside just as the shelves collapsed around us, burying the glass room in a mountain of erased history. We were trapped in a fishbowl, buried under the weight of erased history. Inside the media center, the computers were on. All 30 screens displayed the same image, a live feed of the boiler room. In the center of the boiler room, standing next to the furnace, was me. A doppelganger. It looked exactly like me, but its eyes were black voids and its mouth hung open at an impossible angle. It was looking up at the camera, waving. That's you," Sarah whispered. "No," I said, gripping the scissors. "That's the thing running the school." We had to go down. The logic of nightmares dictates that the only way out is through the heart of the monster. The media center had a ventilation shaft. I kicked the grate open. "It's tight, but it leads to the maintenance tunnels. We can get to the boiler room from there. Kill the head, the body dies." It was a desperate theory, born of too many movies, but it was all I had. Crawling through the vents was a claustrophobic hell. The metal was slick with condensation. We could hear things scurrying in the parallel shafts, clicking sounds like giant beetles. I was in the lead. I saw a grate ahead looking down into the science wing. I paused and looked down. The science wing was flooded. The water was waist-deep and dark. Floating in the water were the giant preserved specimens from the biology closets, sharks, fetal pigs, tapeworms. But they had grown. They were swimming, and standing on the lab tables were students, stranded while things circled in the water below. I couldn't help them. I had to keep moving. I bit my lip until it bled to keep from screaming. We dropped out of the vents into the sub-basement. It was hot down here. The heat was oppressive, smelling of sulfur and burnt hair. The hum of the school's heart was deafening. We walked past the janitorial supplies. The mops were standing upright on their own, swaying to a silent song. We reached the boiler room. The heavy iron door was hot to the touch. I looked at the students. There were only 6 left. The vents had taken the rest. I didn't know how or when. They had just faded away in the darkness. "Stay here," I ordered. "If I don't come back in 2 minutes, run. Just run blindly. Don't stop." I pushed the door open. The boiler room was a cavern. The furnace was a massive gaping maw of iron and fire, roaring with an unnatural intensity. And standing there was the not Thorne. It turned to face me. Its movements were jerky, stop motion. "The class hasn't rung," it said. Its voice was the PA system. "Class is dismissed," I yelled, rushing it. It didn't fight back. It just smiled, its mouth tearing wider at the corners. As I plunged the scissors into its chest, I didn't hit flesh. I hit dry leaves. The creature exploded into a cloud of dry, crumbling paper and dust. The furnace roared. The fire turned green. The walls of the boiler room began to scream, a chorus of 1,000 voices.
The illusion was breaking. The structural integrity of the nightmare was collapsing. I ran back to the students. Go, up the stairs, the fire exit. The stairs were twisting, spiraling like a corkscrew. We climbed. The concrete turned to mud, then to flesh, then back to concrete. The roar behind us was consuming everything. I saw the darkness swallowing the bottom of the stairs, eating the world. We burst through the double doors at the top of the landing. Cold air. Rain. Real rain. We tumbled out on the wet asphalt of the faculty parking lot. The storm was still raging, but it was a normal storm. The sky was gray, not purple. Police cars were everywhere. Blue and red lights flashed, blinding us. SWAT teams were shouting, weapons raised. Get down, hands in the air. We collapsed on the pavement, sobbing. I looked back at the school. It looked normal, just a brick building in the rain. No breathing walls, no infinite hallways. They told us later it was a gas leak, mass hallucination caused by carbon monoxide and hysteria. They said the students we lost had run off into the woods in a panic and got lost or consumed to the fumes in hidden corners. But I know because when they did the head count, they found everyone except the students who vanished in the vents. They're still listed as missing. And I know because sometimes when I'm grading papers late at night in my new job, I'll hear that wet sliding sound in the hallway. I'll look at the clock and the hands will be frozen. And on the back of my neck, I'll feel the hot, stale breath of the school, waiting for the bell to ring.
I never believed in the supernatural. I was a man of history, of dates and hard facts, the kind of teacher who grounded his students in the tangible reality of the past so they wouldn't get lost in the clouds of the future. But what happened at St. Jude's Academy on November 14th wasn't history. It wasn't science. And it certainly wasn't a drill. St. Jude's was one of those monolithic boarding schools in upstate New York, a Gothic revivalist nightmare of red brick and gargoyles perched on a cliff overlooking a valley that spent 6 months of the year buried in snow. I taught AP European History in room 304, a corner classroom on the 3rd floor. It was a Tuesday. I remember that clearly because Tuesday was the day the cafeteria served that unrecognizable meatloaf, and the smell of it usually wafted up through the vents by 4th period. But that day, the air smelled different. It smelled like ozone and wet copper. The snow had started falling around dawn, thick, heavy flakes that stuck to the tall, arched windows, turning the view outside into a blinding wall of white. By 1 p.m., the blizzard was howling, rattling the panes in their lead frames. My students, 16 seniors with varying degrees of senioritis, were barely listening to my lecture on the Congress of Vienna. I didn't blame them. The atmosphere in the room was heavy, pressurized, like the air before a lightning strike. Then, the PA system crackled. Usually the intercom began with a high-pitched chime. This time, it was just a burst of static, followed by a sound that made my teeth ache. A wet, sucking noise, like a boot being pulled out of deep mud. Then, Principal Holloway's voice came through. But it was wrong. It was too slow, the pitch shifting up and down like a warped vinyl record. Code red. These shepherds are sleeping. Lockdown. This is not a drill. Code red. The static cut out with a violent pop. For a second, nobody moved. We had practiced this. We knew the drill. Lights off, blinds down, door locked, hide in the corner away from the sightline of the door. But the phrase, "the shepherds are sleeping," that wasn't in the handbook. The code for an active shooter was bluebird. The code for a weather emergency was gray sky. I had never heard "the shepherds are sleeping." "Mr. Thorne?" Sarah Jenkins asked, her voice trembling. She was sitting in the front row, her face pale. "Move," I whispered, snapping into action, just like we practiced, quietly, now. I rushed to the door. The hallway was empty, bathed in the sickly yellow light of the old fluorescent tubes.
I locked it, slid the heavy magnetic strip over the latch, and covered the small window with the black construction paper flap we kept velcroed above it. When I turned back, the room was already dark, save for the gray, diffused light filtering through the snow-covered windows. The students were huddled in the back corner behind my desk and the file cabinets. I joined them, sliding down the wall to sit on the cold linoleum. I put a finger to my lips. We waited. In a normal lockdown, you hear things. You hear the distant slam of doors, the squawk of radios, the heavy boots of the resource officer jogging down the hall. But St. Jude's had fallen into a silence so profound it felt physical. The wind outside had stopped. The heating vents had stopped. Even the ambient electrical buzz of the building seemed to have died. We sat there for 20 minutes, then 40. My leg was cramping, but I didn't dare move. I checked my phone to text the faculty group chat. No service. I looked at the students. They were checking theirs too, shaking heads. No Wi-Fi, no LTE. We were in a dead zone. It was an hour in when we heard the first sound from the hallway. It wasn't footsteps. It was a dragging sound. Shh, thump. Shh, thump. Something heavy and wet was moving down the corridor. It sounded like a soaking wet carpet being pulled over the tiles. It stopped right outside our door. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I could see the shadow of feet under the crack of the door, but the shadow was wrong. It didn't look like two shoes. It looked like a long, pooling mass that spread out, blocking the light from the hallway entirely. The door handle jiggled, gently at first, then violently. Click, clack, clack, clack. The lock held. The students were gripping each other's hands, tears streaming silently down their faces. Sarah buried her head in her knees. Then a voice came from the other side of the door. It wasn't shouting. It was whispering right up against the wood. "Mr. Thorne, open the door. I forgot my skin." It sounded like Leo, a student from my second period, but the cadence was robotic, devoid of inflection. "Mr. Thorne, please, it's cold out here without the rest of me." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter storm. I squeezed my eyes shut and prayed to a god I hadn't spoken to in years. The door handle rattled again, so hard I thought the screws would shear off. Then abruptly, the shadow under the door retracted. The dragging sound resumed, moving away, down towards the science wing. We didn't move for another 2 hours. The light in the room was fading as the afternoon wore on, the gray turning to a bruised purple. "I have to pee," whispered a boy named Mark. "Hold it," I hissed. "I can't." We were trapped. But as the sun set, the temperature in the room plummeted. We could see our breath. The school's heating was definitely off. If we stayed here all night, we might freeze. But going out there... Suddenly, a scream shattered the silence. It was high, piercing, and cut short by a wet crunching noise. It came from room 302, Mrs. Holloway's English class, next door. The scream was followed by a sound I can only describe as 1,000 marbles being dropped on the floor, skittering and rolling. Then silence again. I knew we couldn't stay. Whatever was out there had breached the room next door. I crawled to the window and peered through the blinds. What I saw made my brain reel. There was no ground. The school was floating. Outside the window, where the courtyard should have been, there was just a swirling vortex of gray mist and snow. The brick wall of the school extended downwards into infinity. We weren't in upstate New York anymore. We were nowhere. I turned back to the students. "We have to move," I whispered. "We need to get to the stairwell. The basement is a fallout shelter, thick doors, supplies." "But the door," Sarah whimpered. "I'll go first." I grabbed a heavy brass globe stand from my desk, wielding it like a mace. I approached the door, my hand trembling as I unlocked the latch. I opened it an inch. The hallway was unrecognizable. The lockers were breathing. The metal doors expanded and contracted rhythmically, covered in a membrane of rust that looked like dried blood. The floor was covered in a black, viscous sludge. The lights overhead were flickering with a strobe-like intensity. "Stay close," I commanded. We stepped out. The air smelled of sulfur and rotting meat. We moved towards the stairwell, hugging the wall.
Room 302's door was wide open. I made the mistake of looking inside.
The desks were piled in a chaotic heap in the center of the room, and fused to the ceiling in a perfect circle were the students. They weren't hanging, they were embedded in the plaster, their faces peaceful, eyes closed, their bodies merging with the building materials. Mrs. Halloway was in the center, her mouth open in a silent scream, her arms replaced by the fluorescent light fixtures. I gagged, pushing Mark forward. "Don't look, just move." We reached the stairwell, but the stairs didn't go down. They went up, both ways. I looked over the railing. The stairwell was an Escher painting come to life. Flights of stairs spiraled into an infinite abyss below and an infinite rise above. Gravity felt slippery here. "This isn't real," Sarah sobbed. "I'm dreaming. Wake up." "We go down," I said, though down was a relative term now. "Follow the railing." We descended for what felt like miles. We passed the second floor, then the first, but the numbers on the doors kept changing. Floor 1, floor 0, floor -1, floor -5. At floor -9, the door to the gymnasium burst open. A wind howled out, sucking at us. I grabbed the railing with one hand and Sarah with the other. Inside the gym, the bleachers were filled. Hundreds of figures sat there. They were mannequins, made of the same red clay as the school bricks, but they were wearing the school uniforms. They sat in perfect silence, staring at center court. In the center of the court, a massive pulsating heart, actual biological tissue, size of a Volkswagen, was suspended by chains from the rafters. It beat with a thundering boom that shook the floorboards. Thump, 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 thump. We scrambled past, the suction of the room trying to pull us in to join the silent audience. We made it to the next flight of stairs and collapsed. We were exhausted, dehydrated. The terror was a physical weight. "Mr. Thorne," Mark whispered, "where is Jason?" I did a head count. 15. Jason was gone. "He was right behind me," a girl named Emily said, her eyes wide. He touched the wall. The wall was soft. It just absorbed him." I looked at the wall next to us. The concrete block had a faint outline of a handprint, slightly raised, as if someone was pushing from the inside. "Don't touch anything," I said, my voice cracking. "Walk in the center of the stairs." We continued. Finally, we reached a heavy steel door labeled Boiler Room, Maintenance. This was it, the shelter. I pushed the bar. The door groaned open. We weren't in a boiler room. We were in the principal's office. But it was vast. The walls were lined with thousands of intercom speakers, all different sizes, all buzzing with low static. In the center of the room sat a massive mahogany desk. Behind it sat Principal Halloway, or something wearing his skin. The creature was huge, its suit splitting at the seams to reveal gray, wet flesh underneath. Its face was a smooth, featureless oval, save for a single vertical mouth that ran from forehead to chin. It stood up. The speakers on the walls all spoke in unison. "The lesson is not over, Mr. Thorne." The voice hit us like a shockwave. Students fell to their knees, clutching their ears. Blood ran from my nose. "You are out of your assigned seats." The creature raised a hand, and its fingers elongated into whip-like tendrils. It lashed out, wrapping around Mark's ankle. "No!" I screamed. I charged the desk. I didn't have a plan. I just had the brass globe stand still clutched in my hand. The creature swatted at me, but I slid under the desk. I saw cables, thick, pulsing, fleshy cables running from the creature's legs into the floor. I swung the brass base with every ounce of hysterical strength I possessed. Crunch! The brass bit into the flesh cable. The creature shrieked, a sound of digital feedback and animal pain. The room strobed violently. The walls of speakers began to explode, sparks raining down. "Run!" I yelled to the kids. "The window! Behind the desk!" There was a window there, blocked by heavy velvet curtains. I tore them down. Behind the glass was not the gray vortex, but the white, blinding storm of the real world. Mark and Sarah grabbed a heavy bust of Julius Caesar from the shelf and hurled it through the glass. The cold wind that rushed in was the most beautiful thing I had ever felt. "Jump!" I commanded. "It's the first floor. It's just snow." The students scrambled through the broken pane. The creature was flailing, its connection to the room severed, dissolving into a pile of black sludge and static. As the last student, Emily, climbed out, I looked back. The room was melting. The walls were dripping like wax. The speakers were screaming in human voices. I dove through the window. I landed in 4 feet of snow. The cold was biting, immediate and real. We were in the faculty parking lot. The blizzard was raging, but it was a natural storm. I could see the flashing lights of police cruisers at the main gate, struggling to get through the drifts. We ran. We ran until our lungs burned, wading through the drifts toward the lights. When the SWAT team found us, we were huddled by the gate, half frozen. They asked us what happened. They asked about the shooters. We told them. We told them everything. They didn't believe us. The official report said it was a mass hallucination caused by a gas leak, carbon monoxide poisoning combined with extreme stress from the lockdown and the storm. They said Jason had run off into the woods and froze to death. They found his body 3 days later, half buried. They said the vandalism in the school, the melted walls, the destroyed office was done by us in our delirium. But I know the truth. I was fired, of course, deemed mentally unfit to teach. I spend my days now in a small apartment with the lights always on. Sometimes, when it's very quiet, I can hear it, not from the hallway, but from the walls themselves. A faint scratching, a wet thud. And every time my phone buzzes with an Amber Alert or a weather warning, I don't look at it. I'm terrified that one day I'll pick it up and I won't see a text message. I'll see a gray screen and I'll hear that voice. "The shepherds are sleeping, Mr. Thorne. Class is back in session."
The snow had been falling since first period. Fat, wet flakes that plastered themselves against the reinforced glass of room 302 like moths seeking heat. By fifth period, St. Jude's Academy was less a high school and more a concrete island floating in a white void. My voice droned on about the Treaty of Versailles, a dry recitation of history that I knew wasn't penetrating the glazed eyes of the 25 sophomores in front of me. The heater clanked, a dying metallic rhythm that usually lulled me into a stupor. Today, though, it sounded like a warning bell. Then, the PA system crackled, not the usual static hiss that preceded the morning announcements or the lunch menu. This was a wet, tearing sound, like raw meat being pulled apart next to a microphone. The class went silent. We all looked up at the speaker box caged in wire mesh above the whiteboard. "Code Obsidian," a voice whispered. It wasn't Principal Henderson. It sounded like Henderson's voice recorded on a degrading tape loop played back at half speed. "This is not a drill. Lockdown. Code Obsidian. Do not let them in." The silence that followed was absolute. Code Red was an intruder. Code Blue was a bomb threat. Code Green was weather. There was no Code Obsidian in the handbook hanging by the door. I looked at Sarah Jenkins in the front row. Her face had drained of color, reflecting the sudden primal fear that had seized us all. I moved on autopilot. Teacher training took over, suppressing the rising bile in my throat. I crossed the room in 3 strides, slammed the heavy oak door, and turned the deadbolt. It clicked with a finality that felt like a coffin lid closing. "Lights," I ordered,
my voice sounding far into my own ears. Mark, the class clown, didn't crack a joke. He flipped the switch. The room plunged into a gray gloom, illuminated only by the spectral white light filtering through the blizzard outside. Away from the door, into the corner, now, not a sound. We huddled in the blind spot, a tangle of denim and fear behind the teacher's desk. The minutes stretched into hours. The only sound was the wind howling against the brickwork, a lonely, desperate sound. Then, the screaming started. It didn't come from the hallway. It came from the vents. It wasn't human screaming. It was a cacophony of voices, students, teachers, parents, all overlapping, screaming different words, mimicking pleas for help, but lacking the cadence of breath. It was a digital wall of sound projected through organic throats. I crawled to the door, peering through the narrow, reinforced window. The hallway was bathed in the emergency red strobe lights, pulsing like a heartbeat. But the geometry was wrong. The lockers were breathing. The metal vented slats expanded and contracted. And standing in the middle of the hall was the vice principal, Mr. Garris. He was facing away from me. I was about to tap on the glass to signal him when his head rotated. Not turned, rotated, a full 180 degrees until his chin was resting on his spine. But there was no face, just a smooth, pale surface of skin where eyes and a mouth should be. Then a vertical slit opened in the center of that blank canvas, and the screaming from the vents grew louder. I recoiled, scrambling back to the students. "Don't look," I hissed, pressing a trembling finger to my lips. "Do not look, whatever you hear." Something slammed against the door, heavy, wet. The wood groaned. The students whimpered, a collective intake of breath. The handle jiggled violently, not with the dexterity of a hand, but as if something was mashing itself against the latch, trying to force entry through brute friction. Then came the voice. It was my voice. Perfect pitch, perfect timbre. "Open up, kids. It's Mr. Thorne. I forgot my keys. Let me in." I stared at the students. They stared at me, then at the door, eyes wide with a terror that transcended understanding. I was right here, but the thing outside sounded exactly like me. It began to bang a rhythm. Shave and a haircut. Knock, 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 knock. "Open the door." The voice glitch shifted, dropping an octave into a demonic bass before snapping back to my tenor. "I have treats." We held our breath for 20 minutes until the presence shuffled away, the sound of wet footsteps receding down the hall. I knew we couldn't stay. The room felt like it was shrinking, the walls pressing in. The air smelled of ozone and copper, blood and electricity. I checked the hallway again. Empty. The lockers had stopped breathing, but a thick black ichor was leaking from the vents, pooling on the linoleum. "We move," I whispered. "The library. It has the heavy maglock doors. We go now." Leaving the classroom felt like stepping on the surface of an alien planet. The school I had worked in for 10 years was gone. The hallway stretched out infinitely, the perspective distorted. Doors to other classrooms were open, revealing darkness that absorbed the red emergency light. We moved in a tight phalanx, me in the lead wielding a heavy metal fire extinguisher, the students clutching textbooks and scissors as makeshift weapons. We passed the biology lab. The glass wall was shattered. Inside, the specimens, frogs, pigs, the cap cadavers, were gone from their jars. A trail of formaldehyde and slime led out of the room and up the wall, disappearing into a shattered ceiling tile. A soft, wet chewing sound echoed from the darkness above. We reached the stairwell. The steps descended into a black abyss. The bottom floor was flooded with a black liquid that mirrored the red lights, looking like a lake of oil. We had to go up. The library was on the second floor. As we climbed, I looked over the railing. Floating in the black water below were the custodians.
They were fused together, a sculpture of limbs and janitorial gray uniforms rotating slowly in the sludge.
We burst into the library. "Barricade!" I shouted. We shoved the heavy circulation desk against the double doors. The library was vast, a cathedral of books. The silence here was heavy, oppressive. We huddled in the reference section. I did a head count. 24. We lost one. I hadn't even heard it happen. Mark was gone. Suddenly, the intercom sparked to life again. "Mark is with us now," the voice buzzed. It was Mark's voice. "It's warm. It's so warm. Mr. Thorne, bring them to the warmth." A sob broke out from the back of the group. I spun around. A girl, Emily, was pointing toward the fiction stacks. Standing at the end of the aisle was a figure. It was tall, impossibly tall, its limbs elongated like taffy. It wore Mark's varsity jacket, but the jacket was stretched to the breaking point. The creature had no face, just that vertical slit. It rushed us. It didn't run, it flowed, limbs snapping and reforming. I unleashed the fire extinguisher, a cloud of white chemical powder blinding the beast. It shrieked, a sound of grinding metal. "Run! The back exit!" I screamed. We scrambled through the maze of shelves. Books flew off the racks as if poltergeists were clearing a path behind us. We crashed through the emergency exit into the faculty corridor. This wing was older, the original stone of the 1920s structure. The walls were weeping. Actual water mixed with blood ran down the masonry. We needed to get to the main office. The only landline that might work was on Henderson's desk. Cell service had died the moment the code was called. We sprinted past the teacher's lounge. The door was ajar. Inside, the coffee pot was still steaming, but the room was painted in red. Not paint. The furniture was made of... I gagged. The furniture had been reupholstered with skin. We reached the atrium, the center of the school. The skylight above was buried in snow, casting a bruised purple light over the area. In the center of the atrium, where the school mascot statue usually stood, was a pulsating mass of flesh and wire. It was the heart of the school. Cables from the ceiling plugged into it, feeding it, and circling it were the shifters, the faceless things wearing the clothes of the football team. They stopped patrolling and looked at us. 10 of them. We were trapped on the balcony overlooking the atrium. "The music wing," I gasped. "Soundproofing. If we get to the recording studio, they can't hear us." We bolted toward the auditorium doors. The shifters screamed, a collective wail that shattered the glass of the trophy cases lining the walls. We were running on adrenaline and terror now. I could hear the wet slap of their feet behind us, gaining ground. We slammed through the auditorium doors, and I jammed a mop handle through the panic bars. The creatures slammed against the doors, the glass spiderwebbing but holding. The auditorium was vast and shadowed. The stage curtains were closed. But from behind the velvet, I could hear an orchestra tuning up. Discordant violins, out-of-tune cellos. But the instruments sounded like vocal cords being tightened. The curtain rose slowly. On stage, arranged in a choir riser, were the missing students. They were standing perfectly still, their eyes sewn shut with copper wire. They opened their mouths and sang a single deafening note that vibrated in our teeth. It wasn't music, it was a frequency, a summoning. We ran down the aisle, heading for the band room backstage. The frequency made my nose bleed. I saw students collapsing, clutching their ears. I grabbed 2 of them by the collars and dragged them. We fell into the band room, slamming the heavy soundproof door. The silence was instant and painful. We were trapped. There was no way out. The band room had no windows, just the door and the vent. I looked at the vent. The grate was unscrewed. From the darkness of the ventilation shaft, a pale hand emerged. It had too many fingers. It beckoned to us. "Mr. Thorne?" A voice came from the vent. It was my mother's voice. She had been dead for 5 years. "Come inside, Eris. It's safe here." I looked at the students. 12 left, half the class gone. Their faces were masks of hopelessness. I gripped the fire extinguisher, my knuckles white. The door to the auditorium began to buckle. The choir was trying to break in. The vent offered a lie. The door offered death.
"We fight," I said, knowing it was a lie, knowing we were just meat waiting to be processed by this digesting architecture. "Grab the instruments, anything sharp, cymbals, stands, drumsticks." The door splintered, the wood exploded inward. Light poured in, not the red emergency light, but a blinding, holy white light. Standing in the doorway was the principal. He looked normal, perfectly normal. He smiled, a warm, grandfatherly smile. "Code Obsidian is over, Mr. Thorne. You can bring the children out now. The drill is finished." For a second, I believed him. I lowered the extinguisher. The students began to weep with relief, stepping forward. Then I saw it. The principal's shadow. It didn't match his body. The shadow was a jagged, multi-limbed monstrosity stretching back into the auditorium, and beneath the hem of his pants, his feet were hovering an inch off the ground. "No!" I screamed, tackling the first student back. But it was too late. The principal's jaw unhinged, dropping to his chest, revealing rows of needle teeth spiraling down his throat like a fleshy sarlacc pit. The room dissolved. The floor became a tongue. The walls became teeth. We weren't in a school anymore. We were in the mouth of a god. As the darkness swallowed us, I realized the truth. The snow wasn't snow. It was ash. The world outside hadn't just ended. It had been eaten. We were just the last crumbs on the plate.
I don't know if anyone will ever read this. I don't even know if the internet still exists outside of these brick walls, or if time is moving forward at all beyond the frosted glass of room 304. My name is Elias Thorne. I teach, or used to teach, AP European History at St. Jude's Preparatory Academy. It's been 3 days since the lockdown started. At least, I think it's been 3 days. My watch stopped at 10:14 a.m. on Tuesday, and the sky outside the window hasn't changed from that sickly, bruised purple hue since the alarm first blared. We all know the drill. We practice it twice a semester. The shrill, 3-tone chime, the voice of Principal Holloway, calm but firm. Code red, this is a lockdown. Teachers, secure your rooms. Students, move away from windows and doors. Remain silent. Usually, it's followed by the giggle of a nervous freshman or the groan of a senior interrupting their nap. But this time, there was no giggling. This time, the PA system didn't just chime, it shrieked. It was a sound like tearing metal, a feedback loop that made my molars vibrate, followed by a voice that sounded like Holloway, but wrong, wet, as if his throat was full of oil. "The protocol is active," the voice gurgled. "The shepherd is in the halls. Do not let him in. Do not let him in. Do not let him in." That was the first sign that this wasn't a drill. The second was the silence that followed. St. Jude's is an old building, a labyrinth of radiator pipes and settling wood. It breathes, it groans. But after that announcement, the school held its breath. The rain that had been lashing against the windows suddenly stopped, not tapered off, but ceased instantly, leaving a dead silence that pressed against our eardrums. I have 22 students in my third period class. They are good kids. Sarah, the overachiever in the front row, immediately killed the lights. David and Marcus moved the heavy oak desk in front of the door with a surprising lack of noise. We huddled in the hard corner, the blind spot away from the door's narrow window. We sat on the cold linoleum, knees pulled to chests, waiting for the all clear or the rattle of a police officer checking the handle. We waited for hours. Around the 4-hour mark, the light shifting through the blinds turned that terrible shade of violet. I motioned for the students to stay put and crawled toward the window. I had to know. I peeked through the slats. There was no parking lot, no football field, no sleepy Connecticut town, just a swirling gray mist that extended into infinity, occasionally lit by flashes of silent lightning that revealed shapes, massive, impossible shapes moving in the fog. It looked like the school had been ripped from the earth and suspended in a void.
I turned back to the kids, forcing a smile onto my face, but my shaking hands betrayed me. I told them the police were securing the perimeter. I lied. At the 6-hour mark, the door turned. It didn't rattle aggressively. It turned slowly, deliberately, all the way to the stop. Then it held there. We all held our breath. I saw Sarah squeeze her eyes shut, tears leaking out. The handle released, then turned again, slower this time. A soft, wet thud pressed against the wood from the other side, like a heavy, damp sponge hitting the door. Then a voice. It wasn't human. It was a mimicry of a child's voice, high-pitched but devoid of cadence. "Mr. Thorne, can I come in? I forgot my pencil." It was the voice of a student I had taught 10 years ago, a boy who had died in a car accident. I felt the blood drain from my face. The class stared at me, eyes wide with terror. They didn't recognize the voice, but they recognized the fear in me. "Mr. Thorne," the voice persisted, shifting now, deepening into a guttural growl. "Open the door, Elias. The shepherd wants to count the sheep." I put a finger to my lips, signaling absolute silence. The thing outside waited. I could hear it breathing, a wet, rattling aspiration that sounded like lungs filled with fluid. After an eternity, footsteps receded down the hall. But they didn't sound like shoes on tile. They sounded like hooves. Clack, squelch, clack, squelch. That was 2 days ago. Hunger is setting in now, but thirst is worse. The water fountains are in the hall, and the sink in the back of the room only dispenses a thick, rust-colored sludge that smells of copper. We are trapped in a single room, suspended in hell. Yesterday, we lost Marcus. He didn't leave the room. He was sitting right next to me. We had all dozed off in an exhaustion-fueled stupor. I woke up to a soft, tearing sound. I looked over, and Marcus was unraveling. That's the only word for it. He wasn't screaming. He was staring at his hand as his fingers dissolved into black smoke wafting up toward the ceiling tiles. He looked at me, his eyes full of confusion, and tried to speak, but his jaw unhinged and dissolved into ash. In seconds, he was gone. Just a pile of clothes and a shadow burned into the floor tiles where he had sat. The other students didn't wake up. I kicked the clothes under the radiator. I couldn't let them see. But I knew we couldn't stay here. The room was digesting us. St. Jude's wasn't protecting us. It was keeping us for later. I made a decision. I told the students we were moving to the cafeteria. It's industrial steel doors and a stockpile of food. It's on the ground floor, closer to the exits, if they still exist. They were terrified to leave the hard corner, but the thirst was winning. We prepared. We broke apart chair legs for weapons. I took the heavy brass fire extinguisher. We moved the desk. The sound of it scraping across the floor was deafening, echoing like a gunshot. I opened the door. The hallway was wrong. It was stretched. The lockers, usually a bright navy blue, were now a rusted, fleshy red, and they seemed to be breathing. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered with a rhythmic buzzing, like a heave of insects. The distance to the stairwell, usually 50 feet, looked to be a mile. The perspective was forced, like looking through a fisheye lens. "Stay close. Do not look into the classrooms," I whispered. We moved in a phalanx. The air in the hallway was freezing, smelling of ozone and rotting meat. As we passed room 302, Mrs. Gable's English classroom, I violated my own rule. I looked. Mrs. Gable was there. She was standing at the chalkboard writing, but her arm was 10 feet long, segmented like a mantis, and she was writing the same sentence over and over in chalk that looked suspiciously like bone fragments. "Obedience is safety. Silence is gold." The students in her class were seated, but their heads were gone, replaced by smooth, featureless mounds of flesh. They sat perfectly still, hands folded on their desks. I choked back a scream and pushed my students faster. "Keep moving, eyes forward."
We reached the stairwell. The stairs didn't go down. They went around. a spiral of concrete that seemed to twist into a dark abyss. We had no choice. We descended. The walls of the stairwell were covered in graffiti, but the words were moving. Scrawled messages like, "The bell will not ring," and "Teacher, teacher, what have you learned?" On the second-floor landing, we encountered the janitor, or what used to be Mr. Henderson. He was fused to the floor buffer. His torso emerged from the machine's chassis, his skin stretched taut over metal gears. He was spinning in circles, the buffer pads grinding against the concrete, scrubbing a stain that looked like a human face. He saw us. His eyes were headlights. "Hall pass," he screeched, the voice grinding like gears stripping. "Where is your hall pass?" He lunged, the machine whirring. I sprayed the fire extinguisher into his face, the chemical cloud blinding him. He shrieked, a sound of twisting metal, and crashed into the wall. We ran. We scrambled down the stairs, slipping on slick, unidentifiable fluids. We made it to the ground floor. The layout was chaotic. The trophy case was filled not with cups and medals, but with preserved organs in jars. Hearts, lungs, eyes. Each jar labeled with a student's name. I saw a jar labeled Marcus. My heart hammered against my ribs. The cafeteria was ahead. The double doors were barred from the outside with heavy chains. Someone had tried to keep something in. "Mr. Thorne," Sarah whispered, tugging my sleeve. "Look." She pointed down the main corridor toward the administrative offices. Standing at the end of the hall, silhouetted by the purple light streaming from the main entrance, was the shepherd. It was tall, impossibly tall. Its head scraped the 12-foot ceiling. It wore a tattered suit that looked like the school uniform but magnified. Its limbs were too long, possessing too many joints. It had no face, just a smooth white surface with a single vertical slit that pulsed. It was dragging something behind it, a chain of backpacks, dozens of them. It hadn't seen us yet. "Into the library," I hissed. The library was closer. We dove through the double doors just as the creature turned its head. I locked the door, jamming a chair under the handle. The library was a cathedral of silence. The shelves towered 30 feet high, reaching into darkness. But the books were breathing. I pulled one off the shelf. The cover was warm, leathery skin. The title was stamped in gold, "The History of Elias Thorne's Failures." I dropped it in horror. We are hiding in the archives now, in the back. There are no windows here, but we can hear. We can hear the shepherd patrolling the library. We can hear it pulling books off the shelves and reading them aloud. It's just read Sarah's future. It described her death in gruesome detail. She's sobbing silently into her sweater. I found a computer terminal that still works. It's an old chunky monitor, glowing green. It's not connected to the internet, but to an internal network called the curriculum. I'm typing this into a text file, hoping it saves somewhere, hoping someone finds the server logs of this hell. I've realized the truth. The lockdown isn't to keep a shooter out, it's to keep the harvest in. The school is an incubator. We are the livestock, and the bell is about to ring. The door to the archives is shaking. Dust is falling from the ceiling. The shepherd has found us. It knows I'm writing this. The handle is turning. It's not a drill. It never was. I'm going to grab the fire extinguisher. I'm going to stand in front of my students. If this is the end of the lesson, I'm going to make sure it's one hell of a final exam. The door is opening. There is so much light. It burns. Class dismissed.